There is a particular kind of exhaustion that has nothing to do with sleep. It is the exhaustion of a mind that has spent the entire day defending itself, explaining a decision to a coworker who didn't ask for an explanation, replaying an argument that ended hours ago, drafting a comeback to a comment that will be forgotten by everyone except you. If you have felt that fatigue, you already know the problem this speech is about. You have been fighting battles that were never yours to fight, and losing a version of yourself in the process. Nearly 2,000 years ago, a Roman emperor sat in a tent on the frozen frontier, writing in a private notebook never meant for publication. He was not writing for glory. He was writing to survive his own mind. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire stretched thin by plague and war, yet the enemy he wrote about most often was not a barbarian tribe. It was his own impulse to react, to explain, to be understood by people who had no interest in understanding him. In one of his private reflections, he reminded himself that he did not need to display strength to anyone in order to possess it. That is the seed of everything we will walk through together. Not withdrawal from the world, not cold indifference to others, but a quiet mastery that stops leaking itself out through every open door. This is the philosophy of focusing on yourself and staying silent, and it may be the most practical secret the Stoics ever offered. Most people suffer from a wound they don't know. They have the belief that they owe everyone an explanation. Every choice becomes a case to be argued. Every silence from another person becomes a mystery to be solved. Every misunderstanding becomes an emergency requiring immediate correction. This is exhausting not because the world is unusually demanding, but because we have handed the world a kind of ownership over our peace that it never asked for and does not know what to do with. The Stoics had a name for the root of this exhaustion, the failure to distinguish between what is up to us and what is not. Epictetus, who spent years of his life enslaved before eventually gaining his freedom, built his entire philosophy around this single distinction. He taught that our opinions, our choices, our desires, and our own conduct are within our power, but other people's opinions of us, their reactions, their gossip, their approval, are not. When we forget this line, we spend our limited energy trying to control the uncontrollable, and we starve the one thing we could have actually shaped: ourselves. Epictetus did not arrive at this teaching from comfort. He lived much of his early life in bondage, at the mercy of a master's temper, in a world offering him no legal power over his own body. And yet, by his own account, he discovered that even there something remained entirely his judgments, his inner response, his capacity to decide what a situation meant to him. If a man in chains could locate a domain that was untouchably his own, then the freedom we're discussing was never about circumstance. It was about attention, where you choose to spend it. Here is the modern translation. Think of the last time someone misjudged you unfairly, a colleague who took credit, a friend who spread a half-true story, a stranger online who reduced you to a caricature in a single sentence. Your instinct was to correct it, to explain, to make sure the record was set straight. But notice what actually happened when you did. Did their opinion change, or did you simply feel briefly better for having spoken, while they quietly formed a new, smaller opinion that you couldn't let things go? The need to be understood by everyone is not strength. It is a leash, and you're holding both ends. The practical application is not complicated, though it is not easy. The next time you feel the urge to explain yourself to someone who has already decided what to think, pause for 3 seconds before speaking. In that pause, ask a single question. Is this correction going to change anything? Or is it only going to feed my need to be right? Most of the time, the honest answer will surprise you. This pause is the beginning of the whole practice. The first small act of focusing on yourself, instead of performing for an audience that was never really watching as closely as you feared. But diagnosing the wound is not the same as healing it. To heal it, we need to understand why silence itself, not avoidance, but deliberate, chosen silence, became one of the most radical tools in the Stoic tradition. There is a common misreading of Stoic silence as coldness, as if the wise person simply stops caring what happens to them. This misses the point entirely. Stoic silence is not the absence of feeling. It is the presence of discipline. Seneca, writing letters of guidance to his friend Lucilius, returned again and again to the idea that the wise person speaks less not because they have nothing to say, but because they have mastered the urge to say everything they think in the moment they think it. Speech spent carelessly is judgment spent carelessly. Consider Seneca's own political life. He served as advisor to the Emperor Nero during years when the political climate in Rome could turn lethal for anyone who said the wrong thing to the wrong ear. Historians still debate how much Seneca privately compromised his philosophy to survive at court, and it would be dishonest to pretend his life was a clean model of Stoic virtue by his own later reputation. He wrestled visibly with the gap between what he taught and how he lived. But that tension is itself instructive. Even a man capable of writing some of the most enduring wisdom on self-command in Roman history struggled daily with when to speak and when to hold his tongue in a court built on flattery and fear. The lesson is not that silence is easy. It's that even the wisest among us have to practice it as a discipline, not a personality trait we either have or don't. Here is the reframe. Silence is not surrender. It is the refusal to spend your inner resources on a performance for people who have already made up their minds. When you stop narrating your choices to everyone around you, you are not becoming distant, you are becoming concentrated. Energy that once leaked out through constant self-justification starts to pool inward, available for the things that actually build a life. Your work, your relationships with the few people who have earned your openness, your own quiet judgment of whether you're living the way you want to live. The modern application here is a practice, not a slogan. For 1 week, choose a single recurring situation where you typically over-explain a family group chat, a workplace disagreement, a friend who asks for your opinion only to argue with it. In that one situation, practice saying less than feels natural, not nothing, just less. Answer the direct question and stop. Resist the follow-up justification. You will likely feel a strange discomfort, almost like withdrawal. That discomfort is information. It shows you how much of your energy has been quietly funding other people's opinions of you instead of your own life. This reframe changes everything that follows, because once you see silence as strength rather than avoidance, you start to notice how much is lost when people never learn this lesson at all. History does not lack for examples of brilliant people undone not by their enemies, but by their own inability to stop reacting. Cato the Younger, one of the figures the Stoics themselves admired most, is remembered for his unbending resistance to Julius Caesar's rise to power. Cato's final stand, choosing to take his own life in Utica rather than accept a pardon from Caesar and live under a power he considered illegitimate, is one of the most documented acts of principled defiance in Roman history, retold by ancient historians as the ultimate expression of Stoic resolve. But Cato's story also carries a quieter warning less often told alongside the heroic version. His rigid, uncompromising public opposition to Caesar, expressed loudly and often on the Senate floor for years, arguably hastened the very political collapse he was trying to prevent. His principles were genuine. but the ancient historical tradition suggests that his refusal to modulate how and when he expressed them contributed to the very outcome he feared most. This is not a call to abandon principle. It is a warning about the cost of confusing constant expression with genuine conviction. A person who reacts to every provocation, who must have the last word in every dispute, who treats every disagreement as a battle for their identity, spends a lifetime of energy on skirmishes and arrives at the real war already depleted. The ancient Stoics would call this a failure of prohairsis, the faculty of choice itself, allowing external events to pull the trigger on your responses instead of your own considered judgment. There's a more modern echo of this cost, one many people recognize immediately: the slow erosion of a friendship or a marriage through the accumulation of small, unfiltered reactions. Not one dramatic betrayal, but 1,000 moments where a person said the sharp thing instead of the necessary thing, corrected instead of listened, needed to be right instead of needing to be close. Nothing about this requires a Roman general or a Senate floor. It requires only the ordinary refusal to pause before reacting repeated, day after day, until the distance it creates becomes permanent. The practical work here is uncomfortable but clarifying. Think of one relationship in your life that has grown quietly distant, and ask honestly whether it was damaged by a single event or by an accumulation of moments where you or the other person reacted instead of reflected. You do not need to fix it today. You only need to see it clearly, because clarity is the first thing silence and self-focus actually protect. Seeing the cost of never learning this lesson naturally raises the question the final chapter must answer. What does it actually look like when someone lives this way, and what does it earn them? James Stockdale, a United States Navy pilot shot down over Vietnam in 1965, spent over 7 years as a prisoner of war, much of it in solitary confinement and under torture. Before his capture, Stockdale had studied Stoic philosophy, including the works of Epictetus, and later credited that study with giving him a framework to survive conditions designed to break a person's mind before it broke their body. He could not control his captors, his confinement, or the torture. What he retained, and what he later spoke about extensively, was control over his own judgment of his situation, his refusal to let his captors dictate his internal state even when they controlled everything external. He did not survive by shouting his defiance at every opportunity. He survived in large part by an interior discipline that outsiders could not see and captors could not reach. This is the quiet, unglamorous truth about focusing on yourself and staying silent. It rarely looks impressive from the outside. Marcus Aurelius did not conquer his own irritability by announcing it to the Senate. Epictetus did not escape the psychological grip of enslavement by convincing his master of anything. Stockdale did not survive by winning an argument with his guards. In every case, the transformation happened in a place no one else could observe the private decision, repeated daily, to stop spending yourself on what could not be controlled and to reinvest that energy in the only place it could actually grow something: your own judgment, your own conduct, your own peace. What does this earn a person, practically, today? Not applause. Not vindication in every argument you were technically right about. What it earns is something quieter and more durable: the capacity to walk through a difficult week without your peace being rented out to everyone who has an opinion about you. It earns relationships built on what you choose to share rather than what you feel forced to defend. It earns a mind with enough spare capacity left at the end of the day to actually think, rather than one hollowed out by 100 small performances of self-justification.